You ever get one of those letters in the mail that just makes your blood boil? That's exactly what happened to me. I opened up this official-looking envelope from my HOA, and right there in bold print, "You are being fined for improper parking." At first I laughed. I thought, this has to be a mistake. I wasn't blocking anyone. I wasn't on the sidewalk. I was parked in front of my own house, like I've done 100 times before. But the HOA didn't care. They slapped me with a fine and warned me it could increase if I didn't move my truck. Now here's where it gets interesting. The very road they were telling me not to park on, I built it. Literally. My construction company was contracted to develop the entire neighborhood years ago. I oversaw every inch of asphalt, every curb, every sidewalk. I even helped install the street signs these people drive past every day. And now this HOA, which didn't even exist when we poured the concrete, is threatening me with fines for using the road I poured with my own hands? At first, I thought about just ignoring it. But then I realized something. This wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about a group of people trying to enforce rules without knowing the full story. And if they were going to come after me, I figured it was time they learned exactly who they were messing with. So I decided to respond, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't about to yell or cause a scene. Instead, I put together a plan that would remind them just how this whole neighborhood came to be. What happened next? Let's just say the HOA learned a few things about the road they drive on every day, and who really laid the foundation. So here's the backstory most people don't know. About 5 years ago, I was hired to manage the infrastructure work for what was, back then, an empty plot of land. My team and I spent months clearing debris, leveling ground, pouring foundations, and laying down every inch of road that now makes up this neighborhood. The street lights? We put them in. The drainage system? We installed it. Every road the HOA now claims control over, we built from scratch. We even had to deal with delays, bad weather, and some very tight deadlines just to meet the county's inspection dates. It was one of the biggest projects we'd ever taken on. Back then, there was no HOA, just city inspectors and developers working closely together. When we wrapped up the job, I didn't think twice about what would happen after the homes were sold and people started moving in. I figured I'd drive through the neighborhood every once in a while and think, yeah, we built that. Never imagined the same place would later threaten to fine me like some outsider trespassing on private property. The funny thing is, I still own one of the first houses on the block, bought it during construction for a great deal and used it as a rental for a while before eventually moving in full-time. So when I parked my truck out front that day, I wasn't just stopping by, I was home. But to the HOA, that didn't matter. They didn't ask questions. They didn't know my history here. They just saw a vehicle that violated community, rules, and assumed I was the problem. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to see how far they'd push it. And let me tell you, they did not hold back. The warnings kept coming. But they didn't know I still had copies of the original development, plans. And once I pulled them out, everything started to shift. After the third letter showed up, this time with a photo of my truck circled in red ink, I knew the HOA wasn't backing down. It wasn't just a warning anymore. They were threatening. Daily fines and even hinted at possible legal action if I didn't comply. That's when I realized this wasn't just a mix-up. It was personal, or at least made to feel that way. I started asking around, talking to a few neighbors who'd lived here longer than I had. Turns out, I wasn't the only one getting hit with weird violations. One guy got fined for a flower pot on his porch. Another family got a notice because their kids left bikes on the lawn for an hour. It was like the HOA had turned into a watchdog, trying to control every inch of the neighborhood. What really set me off, though, was when they sent someone to knock on my door. A board member, someone I'd never met, tried to explain the rules to me like I was some clueless tenant. They had no idea I was one of the original builders. I asked her if she knew who poured the concrete under her feet. She laughed, said, That doesn't matter now. The HOA governs this property. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about parking. It was about power, about control. So I started digging. I went through old files, blueprints, contracts, anything I still had from the original build. I found some interesting things. For starters, several of the roads in question were technically public easements, not private, meaning the HOA had no legal claim over them. On top of that, there were permits tied to my company's name that were never officially transferred. That opened up a whole new can of worms. I could feel the story starting to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. But I wasn't going to rush into it. Not yet. I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went, because something told me this was just the beginning. By this point, I had a full folder of documents, maps, permits, construction agreements, emails between the city and my company, all proving the same thing. I wasn't just some homeowner bending the rules. I was the one who helped create the blueprint for this entire place. But none of that seemed to matter to the HOA. They kept due, sending more letters, each one with more aggressive wording. They even scheduled a formal hearing to review my violation. That's when I knew things were about to hit a boiling point. I showed up to that meeting with everything printed out and organized. I had photos of the roads during construction, engineering plans with my signature, even old inspection logs, with my name on them. But when I walked into the room, it felt like they'd already made up their minds. The board sat behind a long table, stiff and silent, like they were waiting to hand out a punishment. One of them, same woman who came to my door, started reading off the violation, saying I was consistently disrupting the appearance and safety standards of the community. That line almost made me laugh. Instead, I calmly asked one question. Do you have any idea who built this neighborhood? The room went quiet. I handed over the documents, one by one, laying them on the table. As their eyes scanned the papers, I saw the first flicker of doubt. One of the younger board members leaned forward, started asking questions about the easements. Another one looked visibly uncomfortable, but the head of the HOA just kept pushing back, saying their bylaws were clear and that everyone must follow the same rules. That's when I dropped the final piece, a legal notice I'd had my attorney draft, showing how the HOA might actually be overstepping their authority based on how the roads were classified. You could feel the tension shift instantly. Nobody said a word. All eyes were on me. And right there in that moment, I realized this was bigger than just me and my truck. It wasn't about parking anymore. It was about calling out a system that forgot where it came from. And I wasn't backing down. Just when I thought I had them cornered, something unexpected happened. A few days after the hearing, I got a call, not from the HOA, but from the city. A code enforcement officer wanted to meet about a concern raised regarding the original development permits. At first, I thought it was routine. Maybe someone on the board was trying to stir things up to save face. But when I showed up at City Hall, I realized this was something else entirely. The officer pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were copies of permits from my old company, some of which I hadn't seen in years. But one document stood out. It showed a zoning variance approval that had never been finalized. That variance, tied to the classification of certain roads, left a legal gray area in the neighborhood's layout. And someone had just uncovered it. I asked who submitted the request for review. He wouldn't give a name, just said, a concerned party from the HOA. That's when it hit me. They weren't backing down. They were digging, trying to find any hole they could poke in my history with the neighborhood. It wasn't about enforcing the rules anymore. It was about discrediting me, trying to erase the role I played in building this place from the ground up. The power struggle had gone from annoying fines to legal chess. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading in the neighborhood. Some people thought I was fighting just to avoid a ticket. Others were starting to question the HOA's control. A couple neighbors even stopped me to ask what was really going on. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I knew one thing. This second twist meant the stakes were higher now. If that zoning issue got misinterpreted, it could open the door for the HOA to claim more authority than they ever should have had. Was no longer just defending a parking spot. I was defending the truth about how this neighborhood was built, and who really had the right to decide what happens on these roads. A week after the city meeting, I got the official notice. The zoning variance that had been left unfinished years ago was now flagged for review. The HOA had filed a formal complaint suggesting that, because of the gap in paperwork, the streets might fall under their jurisdiction after all. It was a long shot, but a clever one. They were betting I wouldn't fight back, or that the city would side with the current system just to keep things simple. What they didn't know was that I had already spoken to the original city planner who signed off on the development. I got him on the phone, and thankfully, he remembered the project. He confirmed that while the variance paperwork had a clerical error, the intent was always clear. The roads were public easements maintained by the city, not the HOA. He agreed to write a statement and attach the archived approvals that never made it into the final file. I handed everything over to the city review board, and just like that, the tide turned. A few days later, I received an official letter clearing me of all violations. Not only was I within my rights to park where I did, but the HOA had, in fact, been attempting to enforce rules over property they didn't legally control. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The real twist? One of the HOA board members, the same one who had pushed hardest against me, resigned just a few days after the ruling. Word spread fast that she had a personal stake in a private security company being pitched to patrol the neighborhood, and my pushback had stalled those plans. Turns out this whole parking violation was never about my truck. It was about clearing the path for bigger control and bigger profits. In the end, I didn't just protect my rights. I exposed a deeper problem no one saw coming. And now, the whole neighborhood is watching a lot more closely. So next time the HOA tries to throw their weight around, they'll have to remember. Some of us helped lay the ground they're standing on. After everything settled down, things in the neighborhood started to feel different. People who used to keep their heads down when the HOA sent out notices were suddenly asking questions. A few neighbors came by to thank me, not just for standing up for myself, but for pulling back the curtain on how things were being run. It wasn't just about the parking rules anymore. It was about fairness, transparency, and remembering that communities are made of people, not paperwork. The board replaced the member who resigned, and the new rep was surprisingly open to hearing feedback. We even had a community meeting where residents could actually speak their minds without feeling shut down. It felt like the start of something better, like maybe this place could be more about living than being policed. And yeah, my truck's still parked right where it's always been. No more letters, no more warnings. Looking back, it's wild how one parking ticket turned into a deep dive into local zoning laws, easement rights, and HOA overreach. But I'm glad it happened. It reminded me that standing up for what's right doesn't always mean making noise. It means showing up with facts, with truth, and with patience. And sometimes it means reminding people where things started. So if you're dealing with an HOA issue, whether it's over a vehicle, landscaping, or something that just doesn't sit right, don't be afraid to dig a little deeper. Sometimes the people making the rules forget who built the road in the first place. And when that happens, it's up to folks like us to remind them. Thanks for following the story. If it helped you see your own situation a little clearer, or just made you think twice about those violation letters, then it was worth telling.